Okay, which side are you on? Is this a player dump from Montreal, or is this Arizona hitting it big and taking advantage of a situation where Galchenyuk had never found his role as the number one center?
But I mean, every trade's a Rubik's Cube. Every trade, there are advantages and disadvantages. There's always a story. I mean, does Alex Galchenyuk need a new opportunity? Yes. There are people that may argue that Max Domi needs a new opportunity too. Although, that last 25 games of the season, he was pretty good, and it seemed to be run parallel with how well Arizona played. I think the other thing that if you talk to people within the Montreal organization, that they're just relieved to find guys that want to play in Montreal. And Max Domi has made it very public and privately before the trade that he was going to be happy playing in Montreal.
So who got the better player?
Well, I mean, purely on talent.
Your hesitation tells me that it's a lot closer than what the public's reaction was.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, I was shocked at the reaction in Montreal simply because this was a team that wasn't very good last year, and Alex Galchenyuk was one of the reasons why it wasn't very good. I mean, in the end, I'm not sure what position he plays. I'm not sure what line he played on, and I'm
still scored 19 on a terrible year.
Listen, pure natural talent. They both do. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, this is a disaster for the Montreal Canadiens.
The trade?
This was the entire Alex Galchenyuk episode, the third pick in the draft. Basically, the first four picks of the 2000 draft, Nail Yakubov, Ryan Murray, Alex Galchenyuk, Griffin Reinhart, none of them have worked out. None of them. The fifth pick was Morgan Riley, followed by Hampus Lindholm. Those might be the two best players in the draft.
Galchenyuk's the best of the first four.
Yeah, and Jacob Trouba or Philip Forsberg, I guess, might be of the top 10 or 11 guys. So this is, before Marc Bergevin could say, well, we're still waiting to see if my pick of Alex Galchenyuk, whether that's going to work out. Can't say that anymore. Disaster for Marc Bergevin. Disaster. And it adds to the PK Subban for Shea Weber disaster. It adds to the signing of the goaltender. And unless the Montreal Canadiens can somehow come out this season and have a really strong campaign, this will be Marc Bergevin's last year. And this will now be one of the reasons why, if he loses his job, he does, because people will say he's the guy who picked Alex Galchenyuk when we had the third overall pick, and that was a disaster.
2 points. One, it's tough to say that the signing of the goaltender factors into any of this when he hasn't actually played for that contract yet, right?
Well, I mean, in terms of, I don't think there's anybody in hockey who would want that contract.
No, but he hasn't actually started playing under that deal yet.
That's fine, but it was under Bergevin's watch that they signed him to him, and nobody would want that contract.
Number two, who's the most educated fan base, the most knowledgeable, wide-ranging?
Toughest, and the toughest.
Okay.
Montreal.
Is it Montreal?
Absolutely.
Okay, this surprised me. Marc Bergevin was asked about the reaction by the fan base, social media. And he said, look, a lot of our fans don't get to see him because he plays out west. I'm like,
well,
no.
I mean, how are you going to convince a fan base as educated as that? You're going to trade whether you like Galchenyuk or not, he was still one of their better scorers, and you're going to trade him for a guy who scores half as often.
But that reasoning may fly if you're talking to Raleigh or almost anywhere else, but not there.
You're basically telling your fans,
they know what's going on.
You're basically telling your fans, we think you're idiots.
That surprised me.
Part of Marc's issue in Montreal, in addition to some of the stuff that Damien talked about, was that he's, he kind of becomes a hermit at times. And so a lot of this stuff happens, and it ferments and it fumes, and then the fans get outraged, and Marc's not there to explain it on a regular basis. When part of a manager's job is to make sure that his fan base, who, by the way, are his season ticket holders, who, by the way, are his viewers, who, by the way, pay a lot of money for a lot of things, there is it's almost like a shareholder. You have to keep the shareholder involved and just to feel placated, Damien.
Well, and particularly when you've been telling them for 3 or 4 or 5, just be patient. Don't worry. Everything's under control. Be patient. And now all of a sudden the curtain gets open, and all the stuff that they've been supposed to being patient about isn't panning
So
out.
is this a good weekend or a bad weekend for the Montreal Canadiens?
Well, I understand why they felt, if they do, I don't know the reasons. If you have to move a guy, you have to move a guy. And maybe this was the best they could get for him.
Well,
It would be shocking to think.
Points are total between the two of them.
But but it would be shocking to think that the Montreal Canadiens, if they decided to make Galchenyuk available, wouldn't shop him around. Wouldn't see if there was
They
a
did.
place.
But again, this goes back, Damien. This goes back, I think, to Brisson's role in all this. I really do think. Now, from a Montreal perspective, from a business perspective, they have control of Max Domi for 4 years as opposed to 2 with Galchenyuk. They do save some cap space. Yep. Which in this business world is important. They have a ton of space now to go out and use it. Now the challenge for Bergevin is to go and use it and use it properly. Well, that will be a difficult thing. You know, my biggest concern from a Montreal perspective is if you look at Andrew Shaw, you look at Jonathan Drouin, you look at Brendan Gallagher, you look at Max Domi.
They're supposed to be getting bigger, not smaller.
You know, the challenge now becomes is you got to be big and fast, and big and fast is better than small and fast. And I like Domi's speed, but you know they already have a few guys like this. So there are lots of I'm sure that this one, I know it probably worked fast, but I also think that they felt something had to happen. And the one guy we haven't heard about, you heard from Talkett, is what Claude Julien's thoughts on Galchenyuk were.
It just gets Montreal's fan base, and I keep going back to that, but hockey analysts will point out it just gets Montreal further away from what they really need, and that's a center. You get away from the Galchenyuk debate, so that lightning rod is cast aside, but the casualty of that is the fact that you get a pure winger.
And the other thing is that Marc Bergevin's had enough time at the helm that he had the draft there and he had the draft picks to put together a young core. And Galchenyuk was supposed to be part of that core. He's gone. Mikhail Sergachev was supposed to be part of that core. He's gone. Mm-hmm. And so you're now relying on other teams to supply you with guys who are going to be your core.
Subban.
Yeah.
Go down the list.
And so when you don't draft well, and then when you rely on other teams to supply you with the guys who are going to be your core players, you're really running an operation that probably really needs a second look at what is our philosophy? What are we doing here? What are we trying to achieve? Their drafting has been very, very unimpressive.
And by the way, where do they draft this time around? 3rd.
Yeah.
Okay, that tells me that takes us into the next step. There has to be more coming for Montreal. Like Marc Bergevin is not hanging his hat on Alex Galchenyuk for Max Domi to turn this tide. Is it Max Pacioretty that goes out and brings back the number 1 center? Is that the lure? I mean, do they do something with the third pick?
This is a team that can't score, so you're going to trade away your best goal scorer. Yeah. And this is a team that lacks size, and you're going to trade away one of your bigger forwards. Yeah. I mean, it sure looks to me, and I'm not the first one to say this, that's for sure, that the Canadiens are going to go hard after John Tavares. And then, again, bring in a player from another team to be one of their core players and hope that he's the guy who can come and turn this team in another direction, which is fine. If they get him, John Tavares is a heck of a hockey player. But if they don't, what's plan B?
Rebuild.
But how do you?
They can't.
How do you rebuild? I mean, if you look at every team that has been successful in the last 10 years in the National Hockey League, don't you rebuild through the draft first?
Right, and that's the problem. Is I think if you were just saying rebuild, except they can't because they've already traded away or muffed a couple of significant draft picks, and they've got older guys on long-term contracts in Weber and Price that would be very difficult to move if you decided you wanted to go down the rebuild path. So I think they're so far in now, they just gotta just gotta keep going.